And we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my workshop. My name is Topher Scott. Thank you, thank you. So today we're going to be talking about some cryptography, a little bit about my background. So I'm a software developer. I worked on a lot of open source projects in Bitcoin and Lightning, most recently BitEscrow. And today we're going to talk about another project that I've been working on behind the scenes that has given me some insight and knowledge into this cool thing called Frost. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Frost. So let's dive into it. Y'all ready? Yeah. All right, let's go. So this is going to be a pretty heavy presentation. So I'm going to have to speed through it a little bit because we don't exactly have a bunch of time to get into everything that I'm about to show you. But my promise is that by the end of this presentation, you will know what Frost is. You'll at least have that much knowledge in your head. So what is Frost? So Frost essentially stands for fast, round optimized Schnorr signatures with a threshold. And so what we're going to be doing in this presentation is we're going to be unpacking that so that we can understand what exactly that means. So Frost is based on a research paper that was published in December of 2020 by these two people, Chelsea Comlo and E.M. Goldberg. So these are two people that work at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. They're also part of a research group there. So they published this paper called Frost. And yeah, so what Frost does is it builds on top of these other two protocols that existed beforehand. One of these protocols is called Shamir secret sharing, which is what we'll get into. Also, Peterson distributed key generation. These are two very important things that make Frost so valuable. Also, just this is like a very brief overview. So what Frost does, it essentially allows a K subgroup of N participants. So just K of N is kind of how we talk about this in cryptography. So K of N participants to sign a message using these things called secret shares without revealing their share to others. So K of N basically means if you have 15 people, you only need 11 of those 15 people to sign. So that's the K of N, 11 to 15 K of N. So what can we do with Frost? Well, just like we were talking about, so we can publish a signed message by collecting K of N signatures. So we can set something up where you can have 25 people that are able to sign something, but you only need 19 of those people to actually agree to sign. So that is what we typically call a threshold. It's also called a quorum. When you're talking about voting, like you only need a certain amount of people to vote past a certain threshold. So that's what we can do. We can publish a signed message by collecting K of N signatures. We can also control magic internet money using a quorum of K of N participants. So if you wanted to manage money with a group of people, but you only want a subset of that group to actually be able to move the money, then Frost is the thing for you. Also, one really cool thing about Frost is it keeps the on-chain identity of all signing participants private. So with the way things are now with multi-sig on Bitcoin and other blockchains is that in order for you to do any sort of multi-sig thing, you have to publish the transaction with the people that are signing. So it includes their public keys, which may or may not be sensitive information. So with the way multi-sig is now, you have to publish all that information, who's part of the signing group, who is actually signing, all that has to go on chain. But with Frost, all of that is kept private. You actually don't have to put any of that information on chain, which is really cool. So in addition to that, what are some hidden benefits of Frost? These are benefits that aren't necessarily outlined in the Frost protocol, but because of the way Frost works and because of what Frost uses underneath the hood, particularly Schnorr signatures, there's some cool things you can do with that. So one thing is Frost should work with any Schnorr-based digital signature protocol. So Bitcoin recently upgraded to this thing called Taproot. This Taproot upgrade brought Schnorr signatures to Bitcoin. And because of that, we can actually use Frost with Bitcoin because of this. There's also a bunch of other cryptocurrencies out there and other cryptography protocols that also use Schnorr. And so Frost works with them too. So Frost is kind of a protocol for doing this stuff, not just with Bitcoin, but with any other cryptography protocol that's based on Schnorr. Also, the Shamir secret key can be provably unknowable. And this is something that we're going to get into with what's called distributed key generation. So you can have a group of people collaborate to create a secret that nobody knows. But you can use that secret to actually sign stuff. So I think that's pretty cool and sort of magic. But we're going to get into how that actually works. Also, this is also black magic. The K of n terms of a Shamir pub key can be updated by K participants. So we'll get into this, what this actually means. But essentially, so one thing with Bitcoin is once you send money to a Bitcoin address, like that, those funds are locked to that address, and that address is a public key, essentially. So if you have a group of people come together and they create this group public key and you lock funds to that group public key, let's say like somebody loses their share or you want to kick somebody out of the signing group. How do you do that without changing the actual key that's on chain that's holding the money? You can actually do that with Frost, and we'll get into that at the end, that you can do that. Yes. So with multi-sig, you would have to just reset everything up. With Frost, you do that too, but you don't actually change the key itself. So on chain, nothing changes. It's just stuff that you're doing behind the scenes with the protocol. So yeah, so let's we're going to get into this crash course here. We're just going to go over some prerequisites to help you better understand what Frost is and what Frost does. So we're going to go over polynomials, scary term, but they're actually pretty easy to understand. We're also going to go over interpolation, which is something you can do with polynomials. We're going to go over Shamir secret sharing, which is a very cool protocol that you should know about. Also distributed key generation, like we were just talking about. Attacks and vulnerabilities on these first two things. These protocols had some issues with vulnerabilities, and then that's where Frost comes in. Frost essentially addresses a lot of these vulnerabilities that were outstanding. So just really quick, so what is a polynomial? So a polynomial is essentially, it's a sum of terms for one or more variables and coefficients. So if you can just dust off your high school algebra, this is essentially a polynomial. So we have this value x, and we can sort of wrap this value x in a bunch of other terms. So we have some real numbers in there. Those numbers are called coefficients. We also have some exponents in there, which are called the order of the polynomial or the degree of the polynomial. And so what we're essentially doing is we're describing the relationship between x and the sum of this polynomial when you plug in an x value. So you can think of it as you plug in x and you get y. And what this polynomial is doing is it's expressing this relationship between an input x and then the sum of this polynomial y. So we can plug in different x values. Usually when you're mapping these polynomials and you want to look at them visually, because we're visual beings, it helps to look at this stuff visually. We'll just pick a range of numbers, like, for example, this curve that I think everybody recognizes at the bottom. So this curve is the result of a polynomial, and this is a polynomial that is used for elliptic curve cryptography. So it's essentially p of x squared equals x cubed plus 7. So that's the polynomial. And if we were to evaluate this polynomial over just a small range of numbers, like let's say from -8 to +8, we just plug those numbers in one by one. We'll get some y values. We can map that on a graph, and then we can draw a curve, and we can represent that as a curve. Yeah, so you got to dust off your high school algebra for this one, but this is a polynomial, essentially. This is what we're doing. So with that, you can do this cool thing called interpolation. So before, we started by defining a polynomial and its terms, and then we would produce data points we'd plug in an x value, we'd get a y value, and so we could create data points from that. With interpolation, you actually do the reverse. You start with a set of data points, and you use those data points to create a polynomial. So the preferred method that we use to do this is called Lagrange interpolation. Again, you don't really need to know any of this stuff. I'm just trying to sort of demystify it for you. So this is what's going on underneath the hood. So with interpolation, essentially you take your existing data points, you plug them into this polynomial that's used for Lagrange interpolation. And the useful thing about this is once you do this, you can actually create new data points that have a relationship with the existing ones. So essentially, it's a way to model the relationship of an existing set of points and then create new points that also share that same relationship. So this example here is we have these arbitrary points on a graph. We can actually model those points by some type of curve. There's some curve that exists that passes through all of these points. And so using interpolation, we can actually create new data points that will fit on this curve. So that's something you can do with polynomial interpolation. Again, this is just sort of like your peek behind the curtain of what's going on in the next thing, which is Shamir secret sharing. So the cool thing with Shamir secret sharing is that you can take a secret. This could be a secret key. This could be a secret password. And you can take this secret and you can split it up into a number of different pieces of data that we called shares. And so you can split it up into as many shares as you want, and you can set this up so that you only need a subset of those shares in order to recover your secret. So you can create 100 shares, but you only need like 5 shares to recreate the secret. That's actually a very insecure way to do it. Usually it's like a 2 of 3 or a 3 of 5 or something more reasonable like that. But to do Shamir secret sharing, this is essentially the protocol. We create a set of numbers it's based on your threshold. So if you have a 3 of 5, then you would create a set of numbers, a set of numbers with 3 numbers in it, just random numbers. You would create a polynomial off of these numbers. And then using interpolation, we can essentially create these shares, and we can use interpolation to recreate the secret. So essentially, and let me walk you through this because I think this is really cool. So you create a bunch of numbers that matches the threshold that you want for your secret sharing scheme. You also have this S value. This is the secret that you care about. So it's the secret plus all these other random numbers that we call coefficients. You use this to create one polynomial. From this, we do what polynomials do. We start plugging in these x values. These x values can be anything, but typically it's just like 1, 2, 3, 4. You're just counting up. You're just using like a regular real number. Creating these shares. Then you can distribute these shares wherever you want them to go. You can bury them in the ground. You can put them in a safety deposit box. You can stash them with a friend. And if you ever want to recover your secret, all you have to do is get T number of shares. So you don't need all the shares. You just need a subset. And then you use interpolation to create this polynomial number 2 down here. And when you do this, you can evaluate this polynomial at position 0. So x is essentially 0. And what you'll get back is you'll get back your secret. And so this is how Shamir secret shares works. Yeah, it's really cool. So that's Shamir secret sharing. So why use Shamir secret shares? Because we can imbue a secret to have a desired threshold of T. Then we could split that secret into any number of individual shares that we want. And then we can recover our secret using any subset of shares, provided we have T number of shares. So Shamir secret sharing is used in a lot of recovery, like password recovery systems, where you want to split up your secret and then have a way to recover it, but you don't want, just in case, because you don't want your password to be so fragile that if you lose one of the shares, you also lose your password. So you want to be able to recover your password just using a subset of those shares. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, so does that mean that interpolation always gives you the same polynomial for a given set of data points?
So we'll get into that. The polynomial is unique for the shares that you put into it, but the root of the polynomial, if you're using the Schnorr protocol, the root of the polynomial will always equal your secret. So if you plug in, so once you have the polynomial set up and you can plug in x values, if you just plug in 0, you'll get back the root and you'll get back your secret. And that's what Schnorr secret sharing is doing. It's
So no matter which share you use, you always get a polynomial that if you plug those same shares in, you get the secret.
Yes, it's no matter which set of shares you use. So you still need enough shares, but it doesn't, any combination, it doesn't even matter. You'll always get your secret back. Yes, it's very cool. So yeah, so we use this for password recovery, but there's limitations. Because these T shares will reveal your secret, that means essentially every share must be kept secret. Like all of these shares are sensitive because they carry some information about your secret. So that you have to keep that in mind. Also, the protocol assumes one person's generating all these shares. So, that's fine if you're doing, if you're backing up a secret. But if you want to use this in a protocol with multiple people, that could be your adversary, that could try and steal from you, then this is bad. Like this won't work. So we need a way to create a polynomial that is shared by a group of people and where nobody needs to know S. Because if you have a shared polynomial and multiple people know what the secret is, then you don't really have any custody over anything. It's just whoever decides to steal from you first. So it's not very secure to do this with multiple people. That's where distributed key generation comes in. So this was a protocol that was created by a guy named Torben Peterson, who's famous in the cryptography world for doing a number of different things. But one of the things that he created was this protocol for being able to use Schnorr secret sharing to create a polynomial where everybody has a share of that polynomial, but nobody knows what the secret is. So this is the protocol essentially, and I'll go over this really quickly. So essentially what you do is you go through the protocol for Schnorr secret sharing, but everybody creates their own secret share set of shares. So for each participant that's in this group, they all create their own Schnorr secret with random values. All the values can be completely random, it doesn't matter, with whatever threshold that you want for the group. So everybody does need to agree on what the threshold's going to be. So for each participant, they create this Schnorr secret. They create shares for everybody else in the group, including themselves. Then they deliver at least one share to each other person so that everybody essentially has a share of everybody else's secret. And then you just add these shares together. You just add them together. And the result is that you get this group share. You essentially get this share that is a share of a group secret. It's the combination of all your secrets together. And because each person has a share that they withheld for themselves, every participant, that no one person has enough information to reconstruct what would be the group polynomial, and so they can't evaluate it to get the secret. So everybody has a share of this group polynomial, but nobody knows what the secret is. So that works pretty great. One issue is, though, is that if people do come together and they do reconstruct the secret, well, then you have essentially who gets control of the secret. It's typically whoever's the last person to contribute. So if it's like a 3 of 5, and let's say Carol's the third person, she gets a share from Alice, she gets a share from Bob. Well, who has the secret? Well, Carol has the secret because Carol doesn't have to give a share to anybody. Now Carol has 3 shares, so now Carol can just reconstruct the secret in a 3 of 5. So this gets us part of the way there, but there's still some other things we need to go over. So really quickly, a lot of people were experimenting with how to use distributed key generation and Schnorr to do these multi-signature protocols. There's a lot of different proposals that were out there, and I think almost all of them were broken in one way or another, because there's a number of attacks that you can do on Schnorr multi-signature protocols. So the most common form of attack is based upon this concept that I think everybody's familiar with. It's a concept in probability theory called the birthday paradox. I think people have heard of that. For those that haven't, essentially the way that it goes is in a small group of people, like how many people do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so in a small group of people and with 365 days in a year, there's a surprisingly high likelihood that 2 people share the same birthday. So for 25 people, let's say we had a room of 25 people, the percent chance that 2 people share the same birthday is 56%, which is kind of mind-bending because there's 365 days in a year. How could it be that with just 25 people, it's over 50% chance? Well, so if you get into the depths of probability theory and compounding probability, there's an answer there, but that's a different topic for a different day. Yeah. Yeah. It might just be love is in the air at a certain time of the year. Yeah, so for 25 people, it's 56%. For 30 people, it's 70%. For 50 people, it's 97%. Yeah. So this has a lot of parallels to cryptography because the birthday paradox highlights the likelihood that 2 random elements in a set are equal, which in cryptography is bad. You want your values to be unique, especially if those values are meant to be like either a secret value or a value that's protecting your secret or a value that you're signing. You want those values to be unique. If there's some way that you can reconstruct that value, it's known as a collision in cryptography, and those are bad. So there's a particular attack that you can do. It's called a subset sum attack. Essentially what a subset sum attack is if you have a large set of numbers, a subset sum attack is essentially an efficient way to search through those numbers to find some subset of those numbers, some small group of numbers within that larger set that sum to a value that you're interested in. And this value that you're interested in is usually it's a message that you're trying to forge. You're trying to take existing signatures and find some way to malleate those signatures, add them together in a certain way so that you can create a signature that signs your message. But it's a forgery. Like nobody actually signed your message. You just found a way to do this attack to create a forged signature. So that's a subset sum attack. So subset sum attacks were pretty much thought infeasible, like even though they're doable in theory. A lot of cryptography, especially like Bitcoin, for example, uses very large numbers, 2 to the 256. So it was still infeasible to do this kind of an attack. But in 2002, this person named David Wagner, he created this algorithm that made some of these subset sum problems far more efficient to do. And so this started to get cryptographers nervous. And then in 2019, a cryptographer by the name of Roll Drivers demonstrated that you can actually break Schnorr multi-signature protocols using Wagner's algorithm. And then 1 year later, there was this gentleman, a cryptographer by the name of Fabrice Benamouda, if I pronounce his name correctly. He demonstrated another attack that could be used to take the Wagner algorithm and parallelize it. So you could speed up the attack exponentially to where you could forge a digital signature in a matter of minutes. So this was known as the Ross attack or the Ross paper, which stands for, this is a mouthful. I think I can pronounce this without even looking at it. Random inhomogeneities in a overdetermined system of linear equations. Did I get it right? Let's see. Random inhomogeneities in an overdetermined solvable system of linear equations. Yeah. So it's a mouthful of a paper, but it's a really interesting paper because there's a lot of different cryptography attacks that he brings together to create this specialized attack that just absolutely breaks Schnorr multi-signature. It broke multi-sig to the point where they had to go back to the drawing board and come out with multi-sig 2. So very influential paper. But all of this is just to highlight that there was a lot of attacks going on at this time. And so that leads into the development of FROST. So one of the driving developments of FROST was to solve all of these problems and vulnerabilities with Schnorr multisig. So FROST was published by researchers from the University of Waterloo. It was also developed by a bunch of engineers from the Zcash Foundation and Cloudflare. I don't know if you people knew that. Zcash specifically dumped a lot of money into FROST. They helped put together a draft specification for the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF. So there's an actual official specification for FROST that's out there. They also created a Rust implementation of the FROST protocol, and it's backed by multiple security audits. So they went out and they paid for auditors, for security researchers to come and audit the protocol itself through their implementation. So that's great. I'm really thankful that all this work was done. I mean, I don't really care for Zcash, but I'm really glad that they were willing to spend the money to actually develop a robust version of FROST that people can use in production today. Not a lot of companies step up to the plate and dump money into stuff like this. So kudos to them. And yeah, there's also many test implementations that are available in the wild. The FROST, the Rust implementation from the Zcash Foundation is the only one that I know of that's actually been independently audited and is ready for production. But there's many other test implementations that you can find in the wild, and we'll go over some of them. But yeah, so how does FROST work? Let's actually get to the point here. So FROST defines a safe, secure, and efficient protocol for signing a message using Schnorr-based signatures and secret shares. So these are the steps. So for each participant, you create and distribute 2 public nonce values. These are just random values that anybody can generate. So you distribute these to your peers, and you collect nonces from your peers. So everybody needs to know everybody else's nonce value that they're contributing to the signing round. So once you do that, you compute the group nonce. This is the actual nonce value that's going to show up in the real signature, the actual aggregated signature, and the challenge. Then once you have that, you can sign the challenge yourself with your secret share plus your individual secret nonce values. And then once you do that, you just distribute your partial signature, you collect partial signatures from others, verify them, make sure nobody's screwing with you with fake signatures, because a bad signature will ruin the whole thing. And then once you get enough partial signatures, you can combine them, and it just turns into a valid, complete Schnorr signature that you can use to spend money. So that's essentially the protocol overview. We'll get into the first part, which is enrollment. So the FROST paper and the specification for FROST doesn't really talk about how you distribute this stuff and how you talk to others. They specifically decided not to do that because that in of itself is a bit of a quagmire. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing networking and communication and distributing this information to other people. So they don't really discuss that in the protocol for FROST. They just assume that you have your own way of figuring this out. So there's different ways you can do it. You can use client server, which essentially you use a trusted dealer, or you just have some sort of coordinator that collects all this information and hands it out. So that's one way to do it. That's usually the most efficient way to do it. But if you want true peer-to-peer, then you're looking at everybody just talking to everybody else, which is a lot to coordinate. Like imagine you have a room full of people and the protocol is everybody has to shake everybody else's hand at least once. That's a lot of handshaking. So it can get pretty chatty, especially if you're talking about that room being full of 1,000 people. You know, it's like, how big do you want this signing group to be? So there's some engineering challenges there. But all you really have to do is just get everybody to trade these nonce values with each other, so everybody knows the information that everybody else is contributing to this round. This is also a good time to exchange stuff for the DKG. So the nonces are setting up the signing, but if you're already hitting everybody else up and talking to them anyway, now's a good time to also set up the group secret and all that other stuff that you need to do for the DKG. So that's round one. Round one is the most chatty part of the FOSS protocol because everybody has to talk to everybody in one form or another. But once everybody talks to everybody else and each individual has all the information for the group, then you can compute the group nonce for a signature. And so this is the protocol. I'm not going to really get into this too much because it's just a lot of implementation details. But basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to collect all this information from everybody else. We're trying to turn into some sort of cryptographic proof. And then we're trying to commit each individual participant to that information so that when they sign, they're essentially signing with all the information of the group wrapped into that signature. And why do we want to do this? Why do we want to go through all these complicated steps where we're like collecting all this information, hashing it again, folding this information to each other, creating this group prefix, having these two nonces where you have a hidden nonce and a binding nonce, and you got to tweak the binding nonce and like add them all together to create. Why are we doing all this? So we're doing all this because the nonce value in a signature, it's the most vulnerable part of a digital signature. So every time you sign something, your private key is in the signature. I don't know if you realize that. Like anytime you sign something, you put it on the blockchain, you sign a transaction, your signature's on the blockchain, your secret key is inside the signature. Every single signature you create has your secret key inside of it. The only thing that's protecting your secret key from being extracted from that signature is the nonce. So this nonce value, nonce stands for a number you only use once. For security reasons, you don't want to reuse that number, so you just generate some random number. It's this random number that you mix in with your secret key that protects your private key from the world. So when you're involved in a group where everybody's contributing information that you need to use with your secret key, you're essentially allowing other people to influence this value that's protecting your secret key, and this is very dangerous. Nonce manipulation is the basis of many different cryptographic attacks. So why are we going through all of this complication? It's because we're trying to get a group of people to come together and be able to create a digital signature where any participant in the group is not able to game this system in any way possible. Because if they can game it, they can forge signatures, they can extract your private key, they can knock you out of the signing round, they can do all sorts of mean stuff. So this is the meat and potatoes of Frost. The meat and potatoes of Frost is essentially this. It's computing this group nonce for the signature. This is really what Frost revolves around, and it's what multi-sig revolves around as well. So
everybody in that group, let's say it's a group of four, is signing, they're all sharing the same nonce? Is that what you're saying? Or am I thinking about it correctly?
When they all have their own nonce values when they create the partial signature, but when you combine the signatures together and you get one signature, that one signature is one nonce value.
Derived from the individual nonces?
Yes.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes. Yeah, so the group nonce is the sum of everybody else's nonces. And so in order for you to get this group nonce, you have to include your nonce values, but you have to include everyone else's nonce values too. And that's opening the door for people to essentially come up with ways to manipulate their nonce value to do all sorts of different types of attacks.
How do you verify within the group that the nonce values, how do you verify that the nonce values aren't?
That they're not malicious?
Yeah, that you're aren't?
You can't. You can't. There's no way to tell the difference between a randomly generated nonce and a nonce that was specifically crafted to attack you. You essentially can't tell.
Hypothetically, within that group of four, somebody could replace that person in the group not know it, let's just say hypothetically.
Yeah, so one example of an attack is somebody can create a nonce that's the inverse of your nonce value. So when the nonces are added together, your nonce value actually gets canceled out. It's typically that's done with public keys over nonces, but there's ways mathematically that you can screw with other people. Either you can, you can nullify their nonce. There's other things you can do.
Problems could never get. When I was trying to work OTC, no one ever wanted to provide a Satoshi test for this very security reason. I'm now understanding. I never understood why nobody ever wanted. I'm like, where's the risk of just signing a transaction from your wallet to prove you have the stats? Could they now could like do this for themselves? So they control that risk of these other nonces, but then like because it's masked, basically then provided a proof of coin.
Well, yeah, so every time you give out a signature, you're essentially giving somebody cryptographic material that they can use to attack you. So a number of attacks, going back a little bit, attacks on Schnorr multi-signatures. So the Ross attack, for example, involves exploiting a random, it's called a random oracle. So a random oracle, for example, could be an e-cashment. So an e-cashment, like they're not in the business of holding your hand and going, sit down here, sir, and then we're going to fill out this documentation. It's a computer that robo-signs whatever is presented to it, because this is all meant to be automated by computers. So because you have a robo-signer on the other end of this whatever protocol, like let's say an eCash protocol, like you're potentially giving adversaries the ability to collect cryptographic material, because every signature that they get from you includes your private key and other sensitive information. So you can collect this information and then use it to attack whoever the oracle is. You can use it to forge signatures. In the example of the Ross attack, you can use it to forge signatures. So you want to make sure that when you create this group signature, that no individual participant can game the system, that they can manipulate their nonce values to knock out your nonce value, or that they can essentially manipulate what signatures they add together to create a forged signature that signs something completely different than what you all were trying to sign. So yeah, so a lot of what goes into Frost is just to prevent all of these different types of cryptography attacks that were prevalent just in with Schnorr signatures in general. Yeah, so we'll get into that in the end, like the other applications that you can use for this. Yeah, because like anything that's Schnorr based Frost will work with. So it doesn't just have to be Bitcoin. So this is just more technical stuff like creating a partial signature. Creating a partial signature is pretty easy. You're signing with your secret share, just like you would normally sign anything else. You would sign with your secret share. It would be your secret share multiplied by the challenge, which is essentially the message that you're signing, but it's formatted in a certain way to make some certain commitments to what's going on. Like the message also needs to commit to the group nonce and the group public key. There's this coefficient you also need to calculate so that your share adds up correctly with everybody else's shares. But yeah, all the fancy stuff is in creating the nonce. The partial signature is kind of boring. I did want to outline that like the first two items here, where we have to negate our nonce values if the group nonce has an odd Y value, or we also have to calculate the parity and a cumulative parity of the group public key when tweaks are applied. This is all because of X-only pub keys. I really don't like to have to do the first two, but you have to with X-only pub keys. So the first two items are not specified in Frost, but you do need to do these two things in order to get Frost to work on Bitcoin, or specifically Taproot. So just an implementation detail there for the engineers in the crowd. And if you want to know how to do this, just look at BIP 327. So BIP 327 is the BIP for MUSIC 2. Whatever multi-sig 2 does works in Frost as well. It's essentially the same thing. So creating a partial signature, combining partial signatures also is very simple. All you have to do is just combine T partial signatures, and the result is a valid Schnorr signature. You just add them together. You add the S values together from the partial signatures, and then the S value that you get from that is your valid Schnorr signature. That's like what goes on to the blockchain to spend the money. What I find kind of cool and interesting is that when you have tweaks, so the thing with when you have a protocol that you want to work on Bitcoin Taproot, you have to know how to handle key tweaking, because part of how Taproot works is by tweaking the public key. And so this is kind of interesting with a group multi-signature protocol that's like a scriptless. So you're actually using cryptography to combine these signatures together. You're not just publishing all this stuff on the blockchain. You're trying to do this multi-signature protocol through pure cryptography. Key tweaking is kind of weird. So I just wanted to highlight that typically when it's a single signature and you're applying a key tweak, you just tweak the secret key, and that's all you need to do. But when you have a group signature, you actually have to tweak the group signature. And you have to tweak it in this interesting way where you have to first multiply the tweak with the challenge, and then you add it to the signature. And that's kind of like, you kind of have to go in depth with like polynomial math, and how this all really works underneath the hood to kind of best understand what's going on here. But yeah, so for engineers in the crowd, if you want to adopt Frost to work on Taproot, then you also need to be able to handle this. You have to be able to handle key tweaking. So this is essentially how key tweaking works. Again, you just look at bit 327. This is what multi-sig does. You just, whatever multi-sig does to make it work with Taproot, you just apply it to Frost, and it's parallel. Like it'll work in Frost as well. And yeah, at the end of that, you'll get a signature. You just add all these S values together. You add the tweak at the end if you have a tweak, and then that's your S value. And then the R value we talked about, like how you compute the group nonce. The R value is the group nonce, and that's your signature. And so that's essentially how Frost works. I will go over some misbehaviors that you can do in Frost. So there's something with when you're doing the distributed key generation, you want to make sure that the shares that the other people are giving you from their secret that they've created, that those shares are actually a part of that secret. They could just be lying to you and go, yeah, oh yeah, I generated a secret. Oh, here's your share, and your share is completely bogus. So you have to make sure that the shares that other people are giving you of their secret when doing the DKG protocol are actually part of their secret. And so there's this thing called verifiable secret sharing. So you have to be mindful of that. That's something that you need to do to make sure that people aren't misbehaving during the DKG part of the protocol. Also, partial signatures must be verified, because if you introduce a bad or invalid partial signature when you're aggregating them together, then you will get a bad signature. Like one bad apple spoils the bunch. So you have to make sure that all the partial signatures you're using to create the final signature, that they're all individually valid. Frost, in the paper, they mentioned that they trade robustness for efficiency. So one of the ways that they do that is they don't really define how you negotiate with other people or how you exchange information with other people. And that's usually where a lot of misbehavior happens. Is like people will send you bad data, or they'll hold out on you. They just won't give you something. And so Frost doesn't get into any details about how you handle people that are misbehaving in the protocol. But there is something that does, and that's where Roast comes in. So has anybody here heard of Roast before? So Roast is a newer protocol that is built on top of Frost, and essentially stands for like robust, asynchronous, Schnorr with threshold or something. I don't remember the full acronym, but it's a protocol built on top of Frost that introduces a lot of this robustness that Frost doesn't deal with. So it helps set up negotiations so that you can clearly, you can easily figure out who's misbehaving when and where, and you can kick them out early, and so that the protocol itself just flows more efficiently. No, so yeah, Roast is built on top of Frost. So it's Frost underneath the hood. To be accurate, they did change some things about Frost. So they base their protocol on Frost v3. I think they call it. I'm not familiar with what changes they made. I think they're like minor changes. They go over it in the Roast. So Roast is also a white paper that you can read, and they go over like some of the minor changes they do to Frost for their protocol. But yeah, so Frost in of itself works really well. But if you're looking for something that's more robust, then I would look at Roast, because Roast has sort of answered a lot of the technical challenges that you might run into in a very adversarial situation where you can have all sorts of misbehaving people just screwing up the protocol for everyone else. To be clear, Frost is still secure even if people misbehave. It's just annoying to have to restart, because the first round of a Frost round is so communication heavy. It sucks to have to redo. It sucks to have to kick somebody out and then redo that thing all over again. So you might want some better assurances on being able to kick these people out earlier. So that's what Roast gets into. And then bonus, I just want to go over this real quick. So this is how you can update essentially a Frost public key. You can update the terms of a Frost public key without changing the public key or the secret, which is really wild, because then it means that you can have a Frost public key on the blockchain with money locked to it, and then you can change the terms of it without changing the key. So that you don't have to sweep the funds, you don't have to set up a new transaction. You can just do all this behind the scenes. And I'll just go over this really quickly. So what you can do is essentially you can go through the distributed key generation protocol again and set up a new secret and a new key pair for the group. But instead of everybody just picking some random secret for their own polynomial, everybody sets their secret to 0. So when you do this and you set the secret to 0, you can still change everything else. Like you can change the threshold. You can essentially you can perform the DKG protocol where you include new people or you kick out other people, or you can change terms, you can change the threshold, you can do all that other stuff. Just make sure that when you're generating these secrets, that the secret is 0. So you're still generating a polynomial, but the root secret for that polynomial is 0. And the reason why you do that is because when you then go through the DKG and you compute these group shares, you can actually add those shares to the existing group share you already have, and it sort of updates the terms of the protocol. So everybody's agreeing to move over to these new shares. They're not going to use the old shares anymore. They're going to use the new shares. And because the secret for all of these shares were 0, it actually does not change what the existing secret was for the old set of shares. So the secret sort of carries over, which is really cool, because it means that then you can essentially have a public key that is part of a Frost signing group. You can send money to it, and then you can, let's say somebody loses a share or you need to kick somebody out. Like you can do all that without having to move the money. You just have everybody that's still participating move over to the new shares. Now the old shares are still valid, so you have to be careful, because you can have people that agree to move over to the new sets of shares, but then some of those people defect and they go back to the old shares, because those old shares are still valid. But this works under the principle that if you already have T participants that are behaving well anyways, then that's all that really matters. Like if you have T participants misbehaving, then it doesn't matter what you do. They can just get together and they can do whatever they want. But you have T participants that are behaving, then you just ask T participants to create a new set of shares with new properties. And so that's how that works.
Does the previous share go away once the new transaction or signing thing is done? Or it never goes away, you said?
Well, yeah, but once the money's spent, I mean, the money's spent. So you have to set up like a whole new key and everything. Well, you don't have to, but like you don't want to reuse keys or reuse addresses. So this is while money's locked up, you can sort of do this. You can update.
What if it's like a business master account and you're firing somebody and you have like a lightning address for that attached to that account? Would they still be able to spend from that, aside from that? Or it sounds like
With the old shares, so they would essentially would need the participation of everybody else. So think of it this way. If, let's say it's 11 to 15, right? So you need 11 people to come together to do anything, right? Now you want to kick one of those people out. I guess just for the sake of simplicity, you're replacing them with somebody else. So it's still an 11 to 15, but now it's new people. So you go through this protocol, you update everything, you have a new updated set of shares. The new person has one of the new shares. Everybody else has the new shares and the old shares. So the person that got kicked out, in order for them to cause any mischief, they would have to get, 10 other people that have the new shares to defect and use their old shares.
Oh, okay.
So but in that case, you already have you already met the threshold. You already have 11 people conspiring. So it doesn't really matter either way. A mutiny, yeah, exactly. A mutiny is a mutiny. But if you're just kicking out one person at a time or two people at a time, but still the majority of people are acting honestly and fairly, then you can do this safely.
It sounds a lot more easier said that way than when it was before. It sounds more scarier.
Yeah. This still is experimental though. So this hasn't gone through a lot of academic scrutiny. So there might be attacks and vulnerabilities here that haven't been discovered yet. So I don't know, buyer beware, I guess. Well, this is all free and open source, so But yeah, so that's it. Yeah, so we went over Frost, we went over Shamir, DKG, like we went over it all. So any questions?
So Frost is Schnorr plus Shamir's.
Yes. And signatures. Because Shamir is just mainly about secrets. Shamir doesn't deal with signing. So Frost introduces that protocol for doing signatures with Shamir. Yeah.
Is there any company in the Bitcoin space using Frost right now?
I know somebody implemented like a module for Fediment that uses Roast. There's also a hardware project. I forget what it's called, but like they created these hardware devices that you could plug into each other to do some sort of like a group signature, and they were using Frost to do that. Yeah. So there's some companies that are out there. In terms of production, though, I don't know of any. Maybe outside of Bitcoin, because like Zcash dumped a lot of money into this protocol. So maybe they're using it in some capacity, but I don't really follow Zcash, so I don't know. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, so one thing I wanted to bring up is so you could use this protocol for controlling money using a group, but you could also use this protocol for, again, controlling a key for publishing, like in terms of Nostr. One thing that I would like to see and I want to experiment with is key rotation. So one cool thing you can do with Frost is you don't necessarily have to use Frost with a group of other people. You can use Frost amongst a group of devices that you control, and then maybe there's like one device that is like some sort of third party that's helping you, like you see with Unchained, where they'll act as a signer in a quorum. So one cool thing you can do with Frost and also with updating the shares is like you can do key rotation. And key rotation is like a very difficult thing in Nostr and just when it comes to messaging protocols in general. Because once you've established an identity with a particular public key, it's like very difficult to change that because everybody knows you at that public key. And if that public key can change, then how do people figure out what is your new public key? Like, how do they know what is the latest pub key? How do they know that the pub key that they're looking at is no longer good? So there's been a lot of development in trying to figure out how to solve that problem in other ways. So DIDs tries to figure out that problem by having like these different, just having like these URLs that you have to follow. So if you have a signed document, there's a URL that you have to follow to resolve to see if that document's up to date or if there's a newer document that's been signed by a newer key pair that's been rotated. And it's all very complicated and nobody really likes it because it hasn't been adopted at all. One thing I would like to see is FOSS being used to do key rotation because I think it would be a very elegant way to be able to rotate. Like, so if instead of like your secret, you signing a Nostr note with your secret, you're signing it using a bunch of shares. You would need some devices to coordinate to create the final signature. But if one of those devices gets compromised, it's fairly easy to replace that share. And you don't have to change. So you don't actually have to rotate your secret itself that's being published on the Nostr network. You just have to rotate your shares, which is just something you can do. So
Wondering about bids. What if your shares can be released like loyalty points and after you like perform a certain number of behaviors that unlocks a reward in the form of a mint that you might have all the pieces to. Trying to figure out how to do that is like not just a group race, but an individual race to like lead people on a journey, go do this in these places, take this physical item or go to your key, add yours to what's there, and cumulatively that unlocks a reward to not just everybody, but specifically to you. So like, I'm just trying to like train people to go through a maze and give them little rewards along the way. Could this potentially do that?
maybe. Yeah, you just have to keep in mind that where does the custody lie? That's kind of like a question you have to always ask yourself. Where does the custody lie? So like what is the threshold, whatever threshold you need to meet, is the mint holding on to all those other shares? Because then they essentially have custody. Well, maybe Mint's a bad example because they have custody anyways. But if this was somehow a non-custodial mint, yeah, like how would you make sure that neither party has custody up until the threshold? If you could involve multiple parties, so you don't have to go to one person, but you have to go to a bunch of different entities and collect shares that way, you could do something like that, yeah.
Different nodes at different locations to foster like community. If you go to participate in each of these different communities, you get a bit of a share from each of them, and that unlocks a reward.
At that point, though, I would